The worst case scenario right now is if the Warriors end up waiving Chris Paul's contract because they can't find a trade and then they lose Clay and Francie. That would be an absolute nightmare. An absolute nightmare, and in no way prioritizing the remaining prime of Stephen Curry. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. That was me just over 48 hours ago. And rather than do my normal introduction, I thought that was quite appropriate, really, given this is the scenario that we are now faced with the Golden State Warriors after the first day of NBA free agency. It was outlined as the worst case scenario, and that is exactly what is playing out. Unfortunately, as disappointing as it is, the Warriors today waiving Chris Paul and his $30 million non-guaranteed deal for next season, and then CP3 turning around and signing with the San Antonio Spurs, joining up with Victor Wembanyama, which, to start off on a positive note, really, I think is a great fit. I love the fact that Chris Paul has gone to the Spurs for reportedly a 1-year, $11 million contract. I think it's absolutely fantastic that Wemby is going to go and play, or Wemby's going to be able to play with a legitimate point guard, which he wasn't really able to do at any point in his rookie season, and he still had a ridiculous, stupidly good rookie season. So it's scary for the rest of the league. It is legitimately scary for the rest of the league, the fact that Wemby's now going to be playing off Chris Paul. I think it's going to be great for CP3 as well. So I think it's a positive move for him. I think it's a positive move for the Spurs. In a weird way, it's a positive move for the Warriors if we're really clutching at straws. Like, it probably would have been worse if, he went to the Clippers or the Lakers, went to Los Angeles and we had to come up against him 4 times in a, competitive team in the Western Conference. The worry, I suppose, now is the Spurs could be really competitive next season. I'll probably speak about that later on. I just wanted to do kind of a whole recap in this episode of the whole Chris Paul experiment from a Golden State perspective, because throughout the entire season, I think the Warriors, actually were viewed as the winners of this trade. But what's happened today has completely flipped that on its head to the point where I think it's an unmitigated disaster now in the final result of things. So I want to start back at the very start of the Chris Paul scenario and situation, where the Warriors, of course, just over 12 months ago, traded Jordan Poole, Patrick Baldwin Jr., Ryan Rollins, a top 20 protected first-round pick in 2030, a 2027 second-round pick, and cash for Chris Paul from the Washington Wizards. Now, I suppose we can make the argument they also got Trace Jackson-Davis as the 57th overall pick from the Wizards, but I think that was a separate trade. If you look at NBA.com and you look at the trade details of Chris Paul, that is what they gave up, and they didn't get the 57th pick in that deal. It's a separate one. So if you're really clutching at straws, we can try and include TJD in, and it makes it look a little bit better. But otherwise, it's essentially all those things I just outlined for 1 year of Chris Paul, and 1 year that yielded you the 10th place in the Western Conference. That's not a playoff appearance. The first thing I want to say, and I kind of want to go through this in chronological order. The first thing I want to kind of remind people of, like, if you look at if you look at Jordan Poole now, and you look at his contract and the fact that he's still got 3 years, nearly $100 million left on it, a lot of people have viewed this now. A lot of analysts now view this as one of the worst contracts in the league, given how JP played this season, which was obviously disappointing for Washington. He was seen as coming in and hopefully flourishing in greater opportunity outside Steph, outside Clay, potentially all-star level player. And obviously it didn't work out. It kind of went the other way where, a lot of the offensive burden obviously fell onto him, and he didn't quite take advantage of the extra opportunity, and he kind of felt the pressure more of, opposing defenses really honing in on him in a way that, they didn't obviously do while he was behind Steph and Clay in Golden State. So disappointing result there. But I want to, backtrack again 12 months and state that we cannot now view Jordan Poole's contract as a negative asset in a way that it was 12 months ago. Like, it wasn't a negative asset, I don't think, 12 months ago. We can easily view it as such now, but it's very easy to say, the Warriors salary dumped Jordan Poole, and that's resulted as the correct outcome because of how he played with Washington this season. I actually don't view that as the case whatsoever. I do not view that, because I go back 12 months and I think, again, Jordan Poole was viewed as a player who, yes, had a very disappointing playoffs. Yes, was erratic at times during last regular season. He was also a guy that averaged over 20 points per game last season. A young guy who, again, was viewed as, okay, if you get him out of this Golden State system, perhaps he can flourish more with greater opportunity. Perhaps he can flourish more not playing alongside Draymond Green, who king hit him in training camp that season. There's a pathway here for this guy to be really, really good and, again, potentially an all-star level player. So I just don't want people to think that, oh, you know what, it was a salary dump, and the Warriors are actually in a good spot now. The fact they're not in the pool business and the remaining 3 years of that contract, because I don't think that really that's letting the franchise off in a way that they shouldn't be. Because I said at the time, and I've said since, that as good as Chris Paul was for the Warriors at times this season, like overall, this has got really, what I'm saying here has got nothing really to do with Chris Paul's on-court ability. Now, yes, he's taken a step back from what he was. The dude's 39 years old, 19 years into his career, of course. Of course that's the case. Did he play up to a player that was making $30 million this season? Absolutely not. But for what the Warriors brought him in to do, and that was to be a backup point guard to Steph Curry, to handle the non-Curry minutes, to still be a productive, helpful NBA player, he was. There's no doubt about that. This has got nothing to do with Chris Paul's on-court value as such. And again, I think the fact that the Spurs have now signed him is absolutely fantastic. But the Warriors needed to push harder for a different player, a greater upgrade. Even if you wanted to view this as Jordan Poole to Chris Paul, if you want to view that as being an upgrade, which essentially it should be viewed that way, given that, what the Warriors also gave up. But the Warriors should have pushed harder to get a player that was a greater upgrade. And if that meant giving up more assets alongside, like more in the way of future picks, then so be it. Or at the very least, they should have, gone for a player in a greater area of need, a different position, another wing or big man, whatever it may be. They didn't need to go out and get Chris Paul and spend $30 million for one season of backup point guard. That's just poor business. It just is poor business. There's no other way to put it at the end of the day. So if you're looking at, options that were potentially available last season, like I wrote about, I think back in December, like literally December, where I said, why did they target Chris Paul and not Kristaps Porzingis? Because yes, you can talk about KP's injury worries, and he was injured again in the playoffs this season, whatever else. But he was a guy who was available last offseason because he could have opted. He had a $36 million opt-in or player option for this season. He ended up opting in and then extending with the Celtics. He was an option. And maybe it was a case of, he wouldn't have necessarily wanted to come to the Warriors, and therefore if there was that threat, he would have opted out and just left as a free agent elsewhere. Maybe that's the case. But there's been no talk that the Warriors pushed for Kristaps Porzingis. Again, we wouldn't know necessarily. But that's a player that I look at theoretically and say, why didn't you go for Kristaps Porzingis instead of Chris Paul? He's a lot younger. He's filling a position of need. Like the Warriors still need a stretch big. A guy that could perfectly play alongside Draymond Green as a guy that can space the floor on offense and be a shot blocker on defense. He's, capable enough as an offensive player to give him the ball here and there at the elbow and let him, take a few mid-range jump shots. He can handle the ball a little bit for a guy that's 7'3", a very, very good NBA player. And I fully think that the Warriors could have dealt Jordan Poole for Kristaps Porzingis. I feel like they could have got Porzingis in a similar deal than what they gave up for Chris Paul. Maybe you add another protected first-round pick in there or something like along those lines. But I fully think they could have got Kristaps Porzingis. Again, Porzingis would have had to have probably agreed to it, given he could have opted out and become a free agent. But that's the kind of player on the same team you literally traded with, where it's like, why didn't you target him in a younger piece? You could have extended a player who fits the need for you so much more than going and spending $30 million on a backup point guard. I just, as okay as Chris Paul was this season, like he was a helpful, productive player, there were just other options you should have gone with, right? Now, the second piece of all this And just to reiterate, like Jordan Poole's contract was not necessarily seen as a negative asset. There's a young rebuilding team there in Washington who would have viewed him as, hey, we're getting a guy for the future here who we think can flourish with greater opportunity and potentially develop into an all-star. Right. I just don't want people to view this as a salary, as a salary dump and being okay with it now in the hindsight of how JP's played this season, because they could have got more last offseason. Now you fast forward to the mid-season deadline. A lot of talk about Chris Paul, obviously. That was their time. If you're looking at all of this in totality, that was the moment where there was a real error in judgment. And to be fair, there's a real error in judgment from me as well. And again, it's easy to say in hindsight, and that's what I'm doing. I'm saying this in hindsight because in reality, I was wrong as well, because I was kind of pushing them for them not to make a move. However, I think there were probably moments and there were times where I would have said, you know what, they just need to use a couple of picks alongside Chris Paul's contract and get something different. Try and get some upgrade somewhere. And again, who that player was, we don't know. Obviously, Pascal Siakam went to the Pacers. OG Anunoby went to the Knicks. That probably would have taken Kuminga, which in hindsight, the Warriors probably could have or should have done. Let me know if you think in hindsight again whether they should have made those moves, because they did have discussions with the Raptors going back to the previous year, 12 months before, at the 2023 mid-season deadline, with the Raptors in regard to OG Anunoby, and I think the Warriors said no because of Raptors asking for Kuminga. But that was the moment to trade Chris Paul, because any team that's trading for him at the mid-season deadline can view him as an expiring contract, can view him as, okay, we get off, maybe more long-term money. We're getting a guy in here on an expiring deal. We waive him at the end of the season. All of a sudden, our financial flexibility moving forward is so much better, right? That they would have been able to trade that contract. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. They would have been able to deal it for something else, right? Again, who that is, we don't know. And again, maybe that's the issue, and we don't know the full facts of things. But that was the moment to trade Chris Paul, because right now you get into this offseason, and now whoever's trading for Chris Paul has to guarantee his deal for next season, right? And essentially you're looking at a team that is trying to get off long-term money, and whoever really trades for Chris Paul, they're most likely going to waive him and become an unrestricted free agent, which is ultimately what the Warriors did anyway, right? So severely limited in what you could do with this offseason. You're trying to convince the LA Clippers to take a bad contract in Chris Paul. Like, you're asking the Clippers to pay another $30 million for Chris Paul next season, and you're asking them to pay up and spend another $26 million over the course of the next 3 years, $26 million a season for Andrew Wiggins, essentially to try and get in the Paul George stakes. It is incredibly disappointing that the Clippers didn't go for this deal with Paul George, and they prefer to let him go for nothing in free agency, which is dumb. But the Warriors having to rely on other teams to help them out is also dumb. Is also putting yourself in a bad situation where, again, you're relying on one of your biggest rivals, a Pacific rival, to help you out, to land you a 9-time All-Star. This, as disappointing as it is, and as stupid as I think it is, that the Clippers didn't try and get some kind of assets back for Paul George and would let him leave for nothing. I understand why they did it. One, they didn't want to help the Warriors out, and two, they didn't want to pay Chris Paul $30 million next season. They didn't want to pay Andrew Wiggins for the next 3 years. I get it. Now, maybe they could have got Kuminga if push came to shove. Maybe it's not Kuminga. Maybe it's Moody and picks. I don't know. Obviously, there's been a lot of there's been a difference in reporting, I suppose, in how that went down. Tim Kawakami of The Athletic mentioned that Kuminga was in trade discussions and that he was part of it. And if that was the case, and the Clippers could have got Kuminga, then I think they are just blatantly stupid for not doing that deal, even if it meant paying Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins next season. And if, in fact, there's probably a path where they could have ultimately not paid Wiggins and just been like Paul, maybe it's Paul, Kuminga, and GP2 or something for Paul George. Maybe the Warriors even throw a pick in there. I think it's dumb if the Clippers didn't go for a deal that involved Kuminga. But then I think it was Clutch Points, Brett Siegel or something today that said, no, Kuminga wasn't actually involved, and the Clippers tried to bring him up and the Warriors shot it down, which I don't know. Again, let me know what your thoughts are on whether the Warriors should have been willing to give up Jonathan Kuminga for Paul George. I think the further this goes now and the further pessimistic outlook on the Warriors, I think you'd have to suggest that maybe they should have given him up. But that's talking from a viewpoint right now where things are very, very pessimistic, where the outlook is very, very gloomy. So maybe in another 6 to 8 months, JK has a great start to the season, and we're thanking our lucky stars that the Warriors didn't give him up for Paul George. Maybe that's the case. That'll be a wait and see, and something again that we come back in hindsight and refer to. The only other thing, and the only other frustration here from me is that the Chicago Bulls, according to Bleacher Report and TNT's Chris Haynes, apparently offered up Zach LaVine for Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins. Now, the Warriors said no to that, not thinking that was an appropriate deal. I can understand not wanting to give up Wiggs for LaVine. LaVine's got a bad contract. There's no doubt about that. But he's a talented player when up and running. Now, there's injury issues as well. He only played 25 games this season. However, I think there's been a difference of opinion on whether or not the Warriors should have done that deal. There's some people that think, wow, like how frustrating, people that are angry at the fact that the Warriors didn't do that deal. There's others who think, yeah, I don't want to bar Zach LaVine's contract, nearly 3 years, nearly $140 million left on it. Real, divisive topic on Warriors Twitter today. I agree with the fact that they didn't give up Wiggins in a deal for LaVine. Like, I think if you're telling me that I've got to take on this bad contract and I'm giving up a starter, like, I don't really want to do that. Particularly, like, he's, the Warriors, best or primary perimeter defender, like, who's going to be in that role if Wiggins leaves. Like, I can understand why they didn't want to trade Andrew Wiggins for Zach LaVine. I get that. However, if I'm the Warriors, like, I turn back to the Bulls with a counteroffer and say, okay, how about I give you, GP2 and, some combination of GP2, Looney, and I would have thrown Moody in there, to be honest, because I'm not really sure what we're doing with him at this point, and I would have probably gone that far and said, okay, because the contract would have worked. CP3 at 30 million, Loon at 8 million, let's say, Moody at 5 million. There's the $43 million that Zach LaVine's making. Like, that would have worked. And if I'm the Bulls, like, that's a pretty good counter offer, because instead of paying Wiggins for another 3 years at nearly $90 million or $85 million, whatever it is, I get an expiring contract in Looney, and I also get Moody, who, I can see how he goes for a year and then potentially extend him next season. Nice young 3-and-D prospect. Like, that's a better deal. That's a better deal for the Bulls to me than, like, Paul and Wiggins. If you give him Paul, Looney, and Moody. And from the Warriors' point of view, I would have done that. Because at least, and like, this is the thing to me, is like, this time this season this time of the year, is supposed to be the time where, like, things actually are looking up and you can create some optimism around your team, and you can think, well, if this happens and this happens, maybe we might be all right next season. Maybe we might return to the playoffs. Maybe if things really go our way, we can be a championship contender again. This is the time where everything, is supposed to be glass half full. And instead, the Warriors are making the glass flat out empty. Like, it is as pessimistic can get. And that's the worry right now, right? And at least if you traded for Zach LaVine, you gave up Chris Paul and other stuff for Zach LaVine, you can say, you know what? We turned a 6-man who averaged 9 points and 6 assists last season into a guy that has averaged over 20 points in his career. Like, Zach LaVine, 20.5 points in his career, like 38% three-point shooter. A guy that can literally replace Klay Thompson, who's walking out the door as your starting shooting guard, rather than relying on a second-year Brandon Pajemski. Like, yes, LaVine's contract is not good. We get it. Yes, he's got some injury concerns. We get it. You can also talk yourself into him. Like, at this point, having missed out on Paul George, having Klay Thompson walk out the door, and having to decide whether or not to keep the salary spot of Chris Paul or waive him, you could definitely talk me into Zach LaVine. You absolutely can talk me into Zach LaVine. And at least you can take a glass half full approach and be like, well, if we can get him fit and healthy, like, he can actually be a second offensive star next to Steph. Like, he's 6'6", good shooter, athletic, not a great defender, but so be it. Like, we need a second offensive star who can average over 20 points a game, right? Like, you can talk yourself into it. And at the least, there would have been some optimism there. You still got Kuminga, right, who can be your third guy. You still got Drake. Like, you can talk yourself into it. Yeah, the contract's not great. It's not like there's 5 years left on his contract. Like, it's 2 years and a player option, which he'll pick it up. It's 3 years, right? I get it. Bad contract. But you can talk yourself into it if he gets fit and healthy. Like, there's some upside there. There is. And you're getting him for nothing, essentially. You probably don't even have to give up Moody. Or if you're giving up Moody, you're probably getting a pick back. Like, that's a deal the Warriors, I think, at the very least should have offered. And I'm pretty sure the Bulls probably would have gone for it. Again, I think it's a better deal for them than having to pay Wiggins for another 3 years. So that's like, I don't get it. I get the team. I get the franchise wanting to open up more financial flexibility. I get it. And guess what? They get rid of Chris Paul and assuming there's no shock turnaround and they don't re-sign Clay and he heads elsewhere, you know what? They're probably going to have access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Cool. Great. $12.8 million to go and spend on a free agent. Here's some names for you. Can I interest you in the Tobias Harris? Can I interest you in Sadiq Bey coming off an ACL? Can I interest you in Buddy Hield, which, by the way, we need shooting. We just lost Clay, I guess. DeAnthony Melton. Nick Batum. Nick Batum would have been a great fit for the Warriors when they were actually like in contention for the playoffs. Now it's like, why would Nick Batum come? And like, is he like, he's like a fifth, sixth piece on a good team. Like, it doesn't make any sense anymore. Caleb Martin, good player, nice 3-and-D option, replace Clay a little bit. Maybe it means you can move on from Wiggs and kind of plug Martin into the 3. I don't know, but these are not significant difference makers by any means. So yeah, cool. You got access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception now. You got $12.8 million when otherwise you either had the taxpayer mid-level exception of $5 million or you had minimums. Cool. A bit more flexibility there. Great. It's not getting you anyone good. It's not getting you anyone with the upside of Zach LaVine. I'll tell you that much. So if I had the choice between Zach LaVine or one of those guys I just mentioned on a $12.8 million contract, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, I'm taking Zach LaVine because at least there's some upside there. Now, again, maybe I can talk myself into Tobias Harris. He averaged 17 points a game last season, reasonable efficiency until the playoffs. Maybe Buddy Hield. Again, you need shooting because this roster is depleted of shooting right now. It really is. So right now, you've got... I love Pods. I love Pods. Should you be relying on him? Should you be relying on him to be your starting shooting guard in year 2? I don't think so. How are you going to replace the shooting of Clay? We'll wait and see. Again, like LaVine's a good shooter, 38%. Will take 5 or 6 a game. Could have had him. And now you've got Kuminga, and I said this the other day as part of that worst case scenario. Like the only sniff of a chance, like right now, unless there's a move coming that is unforeseen. Again, a trade for a star. Maybe they go and get Larry Markkinen. I don't know who else it is. You know, maybe it's Brandon Ingram. I don't think Brandon Ingram's a fit at the Warriors. Like I'd legitimately prefer Got LaVine than Ingram. Now that's gonna shock some people, and people be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Like Ingram's far closer to being an all-star than LaVine is. Well, not really actually. Like LaVine's a 2-time all-star, Ingram's a 1-time all-star, and the difference in assets, like the Warriors to get Ingram would have to give up multiple first-round picks. You wouldn't have had to do that with LaVine. Like Bulls are just trying to get off his contract. Like they'd almost give you an asset to take him. Like I'd much rather LaVine for the price. And so now you're ending up with Kuminga as your only pathway to being a playoff team next season. And I'm talking about Steph being great again. I'm talking about Steph averaging 27, 28 points a game. He can do that. I don't think this team's a playoff team by any means, even if he does that. I think Draymond could be on his best behavior next season, play 70-plus games, be an impactful defensive player. Still don't think this is a playoff team as currently constructed. Unless Jonathan Kuminga is literally like averaging 25 points a game next season and takes a huge leap on both ends of the floor, mind you. Unless he's a legitimate all-star, I don't see how this is a playoff team. I don't see how this is a playoff team. And I'm looking through the West now. So you've got to think that how could they possibly be better next season than any of the 9 teams that finished above them this season? Most of them are getting better. A lot of them are young, so there's internal improvement. How are the Warriors any better? Like, how do they project to be any better than those 9 teams that finished ahead of them? I don't see it. And then the teams below them, I think Houston are in a far better spot to be better next season, as painful it is to say. Memphis in a far better spot to be better than the Warriors next season. So all of a sudden you're talking about the Warriors being 13th. 13th in the West. And then, like, the Spurs go get CP3 and, like, Wemby's a freak. And, like, they could make some other moves. They could be pretty competitive. Like, I think the only team the Warriors are probably guaranteed to be better than in the West next season is the Trailblazers. Like, you are looking at a team that, no word of a lie, could be anywhere between 12th and 14th in the West right now. And this sucks to say, because you know what? I like to think I'm a pretty optimistic person. Like, I like to try and see the good in things. I try and be a glass half full, but the Warriors are making it tough right now. They are making it tough. Even the eternal optimists, people who, by nature, are glass half full, like me. I like to think I see the good in stuff. It's hard to see the good in the Warriors right now. It's hard. It's really tough. And so it's disappointing. And you know what the funny thing is, and this will sound blasphemous to say, and just hear me out. This will sound blasphemous to say. Steph Curry's a burden on this franchise right now. He's a burden on this franchise. Let me explain, because it sounds stupid, I know. Let me explain. If Steph Curry didn't exist, just flat out didn't exist, or he was on another team, right? He was on another team. Then we could look at this and say, yeah, you know what? They're going to be one of the worst teams in the league next season. They're going to probably be 13th or 14th in the West. You know what? That'd be okay. You know, we've won 4 championships. That's okay. If that's the expectation, fine. Maybe we get some enjoyment out of, you know, JK developing, Pods developing, Moody hangs around, actually becomes a consistent rotation player. TJD takes another step. Maybe we'll see something out of Quinton Post. Maybe Lindy Waters, the third, surprises us. You know, maybe some things happen and maybe we sneak into the play-in tournament. Don't know. If that was the case, that's probably live with it. And you try and take the positives out of the young guys, right? Fully acknowledging that you're not a playoff team. However, with Steph Curry, who's still a top 10 player in the league, despite being 36 years old, an all-NBA caliber player, your franchise's greatest ever player, with him there, the expectation is that you, at minimum, should be a playoff team. That should be the expectation. And if you fall short of that, you have failed Steph Curry. You have failed him. Right? So all these moves that are being made, right? CP3 getting waived, going to the Spurs, Clay leaving now. Like, everything that's happening, we can talk about it for hours on end. But ultimately, how does it impact Steph Curry? And what should the franchise be doing when they've still got their best ever player and a top 10 player in the league on the roster? And at the end of the day, they should be prioritizing him and still putting this team in a position where they can challenge to not only make the playoffs, but be a contender in the West. And right now, the Portland Trail Blazers are the only team, I think, that the Warriors are probably guaranteed to be better than next season. One team out of 15. Which is also a credit to the West. Like, it's a deep conference. Like, there's plenty of good teams. Like, it's not all on the Warriors. It's like, this is a good team as well. But you gotta live with that, and you gotta understand that. You gotta make moves knowing that. All right. The other thing I want to finish off on, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that go the other way and say, you know what? Maybe they tried for days to trade Chris Paul. They pushed his guarantee date back. They aggressively pursued Paul George. They really tried to have it going. From Kawakami's article, PG was keen on coming to the Warriors. Like, he was all on board. The Warriors were going to guarantee him a 4-year, $220 million extension. PG wanted it. The Warriors wanted it. Steph and Draymond were on board, and ultimately the Clippers said no. Right? And you could go back and, maybe they were trying to trade Chris Paul at the deadline and at the midseason deadline, and maybe they're trying to trade Andrew Wiggins right now. At the end of the day, you are evaluated in your job or in anything in life. Like, anything is evaluated by the final result, right? That is all that matters at the end of the day. There shouldn't be any could've, would've, should'ves. Albeit I've done a lot of that in this episode, going back to the whole Chris Paul deal in hindsight. I understand I've done that. But at the end of the day, like, that, nothing of that matters apart from the final result. So if the final result is the Warriors don't really make a significant move by any means, they waive Chris Paul, they let go of Klay Thompson, and they end up signing Buddy Hield, that's a disaster for a team that, again, is prioritizing Steph Curry. If there was no Steph Curry, then, okay, the expectations are really low heading into next season, and you just deal with that. But it's all on Steph Curry, right? The Warriors should be prioritizing him in a manner that they simply are not right now. And so you can try and defend Mike Dunleavy Jr., the front office ownership, and say, oh, they tried really hard to get Paul George, and they tried to do this, they tried to do that, and it just didn't come off. At the end of the day, it's a results-based business in every single sport, right? Cool, they tried to go after Paul George. You know what? Didn't happen because they put themselves in a situation where they had to rely on a direct rival to help them out. Didn't happen. Okay? You know what? I just spent $10 on a lottery ticket, hoping to win $200 million. If it doesn't happen, I've just wasted $10. Cool, might be great if it works out. But at the end of the day, it's the result that matters. Not what you tried to do. I tried to win $200 million, failed. Doesn't matter. The failure is what matters. Not what you intended or what you tried to do. So I get there's going to be people defending Mike Dunleavy Jr. and the front office and saying they tried to do this, they tried to do that, and it didn't, and ultimately, no one helped them out. Well, you shouldn't be putting yourself in a situation where, teams or rival players or whatever have got to help you out. That's not the way you should be doing business. In anything, really. Like, you got to take personal responsibility for what your job entails. You can't go out and blame the Clippers. I think it's stupid what the Clippers did. I don't blame them for the Warriors not having Paul George. I don't blame them for that. I think it's stupid, but I don't blame them. So anyway, another pessimistic episode, and I apologize to a degree, but I'm also just telling it how it is. And frustrating day. Didn't really talk about Klay too much. Sounds like there's going to be some sign and trade possibilities again with him. I'd actually be surprised if they take back too much in contracts, because again, they want to have access to that non-taxpayer mid-level exception, because I still think, as unexciting as some of those options are that I laid out, I think they're actually still better than what the Warriors would potentially get in a sign and trade. Like, cool, go to the Lakers and get Gabe Vincent. No, thanks. I'll take the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Get Maxi Kleber from the Mavericks. No, thanks. I'll take the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So maybe they open up a trade exception or something like that. We'll wait and see. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff to come. Obviously, pretty quiet day of free agency, really. On day one, it sounded like most of the teams didn't want to get done for any bad behavior in terms of talking to free agents early, and then all of a sudden there's a glut of free agent deals that happen at 6:01 when free agency opens. Seems like teams are kind of backing away from that and being like, we don't want to lose second round picks, we don't want to get in trouble, we don't want to get fined. So very inactive day one of free agency, really. And there's still players on the board that the Warriors can target and try and get with that non-taxpayer mid-level exception. But again, it's not going to be a significant difference maker. It's not going to provide the optimism that even like a Zach LaVine would have. But let me know your thoughts in the comments if you're on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed already, that would be greatly appreciated. Probably be back again tomorrow, depending on obviously what happens. If there's any, mate, if something happens, concrete with Clay, then I'll come on and talk about it. If the Warriors sign a free agent or something, or make another trade, I don't know. There's still hope. There's still hope that something is in the works here and something can get done. But most of the hope was surrounding Chris Paul's contract, and now that's just not available to them. So it's the hope's dwindling, and it's a very pessimistic outlook. Other than that, guys, you can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And you can follow my content on bluemanhoop.com as well, where I got up at 5 a.m. this morning, my time. I think I've wrote 6 or 7 articles today, just covering obviously all the news in regard to CP3, Clay, whoever else. So look out for that. And otherwise, I'll see you on the next episode.